Precarious times, and this is the voice of the symposium, and I think some of you would recognize some of your words to give you an idea that this is our discourse, and I'm part of that, and I'm talking the same language. And then also there is a call for a new way of thinking, and everybody is bringing something that they think would be the breakthrough to the next opportunity that we might have to fix the problems that maybe we have created. So there are lots of things which are being talked about, like a paradigm shift or collaboration and not competition, and sustainability ways, etc., etc. There is also a little talk about coming very strongly is working together, whether it is transdisciplinary, whether it is transnational, whether it is transcultural, whether it is trans-knowledge. And that's where I wanted to situate my presentation. So when I look at the literature which I used in my thesis, I look at sustainability being calling for an alternative. But it's a search not for a developmental alternative, because we do talk about sustainability as sustainable development, but it's an alternative to development. That's what we are looking at. We are looking at maybe moving away, and it's the time for contraction and not for development and growth. We need to stop, and I think that's the point that I want to just emphasize, that yes, that is maybe the point where we have reached, where we start to look at, okay, humanity needs to live more lightly, and all the things that we read about these things. Now, when we talk about indigenous and non-Western knowledge traditions, and I heard a lot of that coming with beautiful examples given by people, and I won't just start listing those people, but I hear and I read the words which have arrived from another language, like mandala, like chakra. So what we are looking at now is a time when intercultural is not about the cultural artifacts just for the sake of celebration. It is for learning. Earlier, when you looked at, went to a festival here or a picnic here where you saw some Indian artifacts, and you looked at getting a henna on your hand, which is now called henna tattoo, which is a different word to what I grew up with. But when you look at what knowledge that person is bringing, because when you use henna in summer, it keeps you cool. You were supposed to use it just to keep yourself cool. So there is some knowledge there. But we do not look at that. We don't go through that. Because whenever we talk about internationalization, we look at, yes, students bring diversity to the class, they bring diversity to the university campus, and they bring money. But what else they bring, we don't have to worry about that. And that's the point, because I work with international students. I'm not an international student, but I'm an international person. I studied in India, and I work with students in developing their academic literacy. And this is how I got interested in what do they bring. Few years, and I started to get more interested in what this school of education is doing to make use of the knowledge that their students are bringing, because education is the point where these things should be happening. Then when I look at the sustainability discourse, I look at all those things about that we cannot afford the luxury of just the pristine, the Western, the Euro-American theory. We need to bring the dirty theory, and that's what Connell says. And when we look at examples of people talking about a Mandela we still don't consider them as mainstream. They are still the alternative ways of looking at things. And while I was reading something, I discovered very interesting commentary there. And I don't expect everybody to read it all, but the first one is from Ecuador, who talks about, in response to an article that this person read, and said in the end, "Thank you, Dennis, for this great perspective on relation between indigenous ways and Western science." And then interesting, extraordinary load of reductionist, postmodern, pseudo-intellectual bullshit. So this is what's happening in the arena of education, where if you bring alternative way of looking at things, they are okay for the exotic and for the diverse celebration. But when it comes to knowledge, we keep going back there. And that's why internationalization of higher education is a point where I started to look at what's happening. So my research didn't start with sustainability. My research started by looking at internationalization of higher education. And this is what my literature tells me. And because I was emphasizing on looking at what non-Western students, international students bring besides their curries and currencies, they are being looked at through these, because they don't know how to write in English. Course, which we are all familiar with. My friends still correct my paragraphs because I give my point in the end. I still do that. Or they are complex, so we can't understand them. But we need to celebrate their identity, their voice. But what we are actually lacking there sometimes, that's what I thought when I entered this arena, was there was something more. So to do that, I started to do the literature review, and I found synergies between internationalization of higher education and sustainability education, because they go through the same path. They both are connected to globalization and neoliberal thinking, and they both have very similar way of development in our mind. Their definition are contested. They are contested concepts, and also both aim to talk about graduates with global perspectives. Both are talking about it. Both call for social justice and equity, and both call, I don't know whether you can read it there, but this is what I have listed there, in which I have tried to match which way they all went, both of them went, to reach a point where one is talking about the other one is talking about. This is where I situated non-Western international students. I'm not saying that each student who comes from those countries will bring all this knowledge about chakra and mandala and all those things. I didn't know much about my own heritage. I had to go back and look into. I can't read Sanskrit, but I can understand Sanskrit, and I'm hoping by the end you will too. So when I'm looking at defining internationalization of higher education as a transnational knowledge exchange, I'm looking at altering the relationship between what we are teaching. And when the previous speaker talked about what do I tell my teachers who are going to be teaching about settling something that the students will be doing later on. So it's very important to look at that relationship, because this is what they'll be building. So my thesis is that internationalization of sustainability education is a good place for transnational knowledge exchange. So we need some theory, and my theory came from Right for Alternatives and Agency, as well as alternative approach from SANE. And also multidimensional holistic understanding of sustainability came from about that a little bit. But before I do that, just a little bit of playing with the language a little bit. So I'm going to recite a little shloka from Rigveda. Om Shanti Rikshadam, Shanti Prithvi, Shanti Rapa, Shanti Roshdhaya, Shanti Banaspataya, Shanti Vishvedeva, Shanti Brahma, Shanti Sama, Shanti Savragam, Shanti Redhi, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. This came from Rigveda. which is knowledge, and some of you are nodding heads, so that you are familiar with these things. And then I look at an ecofeminist from India using Vandana, Dr. Vandana Shiva, and she is using nature. She wants to, and she has already floated as a concept which is being accepted. So that is the transnational knowledge exchange already happening. So nature as Prakriti is the active and productive power which permeates every stone or tree, etc. So it's looking at nature and also looking at the reciprocal nature, a relationship between human beings and nature, because it's kind of it's a gift, and we have to be responsible to that. And we are, the nature is not part of us, we are part of the nature and all sorts of things. So these are the things which she got from the knowledge that is there in Rig Veda. And we recite it every day, and half the time we don't understand what we are reciting usually. So this is where I introduce Trivet. Now Trivet, I want to, and I really apologize, I tried to look earlier how to make it bigger, because people at the end may not be able to read it, but I'll just read it. To be able to use some intertextuality, you need to know both the languages. And if I stand here and start, you don't have any understanding of, then you would say, Neera can stand here and say anything. We don't know anything. So what I tried to do was, I tried to bring some language which most of you are, and I am, aware of, and paradigm. So when we look at a paradigm, worldview that defines for its holder the nature of the world. It's from Guba and Lincoln, and all of you are aware of that, I hope. And we look at what exists, what can be known, how can it be known. And I think all the research depends on that. But for my research, I would go a little bit further, and I looked at the Trivet. Trivet comes from the Vedas. It comes from Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna is giving the sermon of karma, and he talks about Trivet. So Trivet means three, Ved and Vidya, which is knowledge. Three unification of, one is Prajanta, which is the knower, and the knower can be the person giving the knowledge as well as taking the knowledge, which is the which can be known, which is the object of knowledge and the process of knowledge. Now to understand that in a literary sense, because I studied English literature in my previous life, and I always used the theoretical framework from the Western world, because they were the ones used in universities. But when I look at Trivet, and one of the theorists that I am really my tribute to that person, because he opened my eyes, his name is Kapoor, and he took Trivet to explain literature. So if I show you this picture, it doesn't make much sense to you, maybe, because it's just a few things which you may recognize. And then I read you a poem, Season of mists and mellow fruitlessness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the most cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. Does it ring a bell? Ode to Autumn from Keats. And now we go back to look at that picture. Now the metaphors that were used in that poem may not make sense to somebody learning or studying where autumn comes in a different way. And and the cow is happy. So this is what I started to think about, that if we can have a medium, any knowledge can be learned. And that's why pedagogy of Trivet, this is what I am introducing. So I'm looking at the first pedagogy, in which non-Western international students is the knower who wants to know. Australian teacher education is the medium, and what do they come here to learn? The Western theory, the Western knowledge. The second pedagogy, which I think is happening in some cases, where Australian teacher educator is the knower who wants to know, Non-Western they are learning is non-Western knowledge, which I am hoping, aiming, if we look at sustainability discourse to change. We are looking for alternatives. Non-Western students and local students, indigenous knowledge becomes the medium, and that will take us alternatives for sustainability and transnational knowledge exchange. So this is just one example from Shiva, that Vandana Shiva's earth democracy is based on Gandhian concepts. But Gandhian concepts were based on Vaishnava concepts. And those concepts, if I just translate for you, ahimsa, non-violence. But actually they have much more meaning, and that's the layer I can bring in. That's the layer that my knowledge tradition, that's my intellectual asset that gives me that sight. So non-violence, ahimsa doesn't only mean non-violence, it means self-control. You have strength and you are non-violent, then you are kind. And that's what Shiva had used in her earth democracy. I won't go through it all. So I'm going to read that shloka from Rig Veda, and if you can read that in English after me, each sentence, that will be good. So, Om Dev Shanti Shanti Rakshedam Shanti Rapa Shanti Roshidhaya Shanti Banaspatya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Sama Shanti Sarvegam Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this is what we have just said. Let there be peace in heaven, let there be peace in plants, trees, animals, us, you, environment, everywhere. So the environment is very much part of non-Western knowledge. Thank you.